Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video that has audio in it. I know, a great landmark, a great starting point for the success of this channel. Um, Before we get into the video or start talking about power scaling, I want to say thank you guys for almost 60 subscribers. I just started this YouTube channel mostly for fun, not really trying to be anything, but seeing 60 subscribers is actually kind of awesome to me. And I know that it's like nowhere near any other power scalers or any big channel really, but I just want to say thank you guys for tuning in and liking my content. And hopefully with voices now, it will get even bigger in the future. But with that being said, we get to immediately jump to power scaling. And today's topic is one that most people have kind of stopped talking about due to the fact that many people think it's kind of a one-sided beatdown. And obviously, I think differently, as you guys could tell from the title of this video. And that topic is the topic of Godzilla Minus One versus Shin Godzilla, which is pretty much existed ever since Godzilla Minus One came out, and is unironically one of the closest fights in all of the Godzilla media. It's not like Heisei Godzilla versus Monsterverse, where Heisei Godzilla literally just one taps Monsterverse into oblivion. I would make a video of that eventually, but enough of that. Um, I think this is actually a very close topic to talk about, and it's very complicated. And, mm, I guess we're just going to jump right into it. I didn't write a script for this video, so I'm just going to be talking on my ass for the most part. Um, the first Godzilla that I want to go over, the first thing I'm going to go over is Godzilla Minus One and where he scales, because some people, for some reason, like to try to scale into country level, which is kind of weird. It's mostly off of him being the strongest weapon on Earth, but that's just clearly referring to nuclear bombs, because most nukes at the time were like into kiloton ranges, and Minus One obviously produces an attack that's like in the megatons pretty casually. But where does he scale, really? In terms of overall physicals, Godzilla Minus One is very clearly immune to most man-made weaponry, even battleship guns. While they do stun lock him, don't necessarily pierce his skin, and tanks basically do nothing to him at all. This would obviously get Godzilla Minus One pretty high into those building ranges off immediately, but obviously he's more in the city block ranges, as Godzilla Minus One easily rips apart a battleship to the point that it's like, uh, ripped apart. That was kind of a really ass analogy. Um, uh, Probably a better feat to talk about, though, is Godzilla Minus One grabbing a building and literally tearing it to the point that it turned to ash. And he immediately follows that up with another feat that he destroys 3 buildings in the similar fashion, even easier actually, and that calculates up into the multi-city block ranges. This should be a pretty consistent end for him, as he's obviously got to perform the feats and survive the feats he's doing, so you could easily already scale Godzilla physically to city block to multi-city block. But other than that, he really doesn't have anything in terms of overall physical strength and durability that scales that high. In fact, he does have a few weaker feats, but most of these feats are performed on the inside of his body, as these are mostly performed in his head. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. It's the mine blowing up in his cheek and blowing a huge chunk out, and the plane exploding in his face as he was trying to charge his atomic breath, which very clearly shows that if you manage to get into the inside of this Godzilla, he's very weak, to the point where even man can destroy him. But obviously, he counters that by having his insane regeneration, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for now, let's immediately just jump to the biggest part of his scaling, which is his atomic breath. His atomic breath is the easiest thing to quantify because most calculations get it to around 17 megatons of TNT. For reference, the strongest bombs around that time were around the 15 kiloton ranges, which is hundreds of times weaker. as even a jump as megatons are about 1,000 kilotons. So -1 would already be like hundreds of times stronger than the strongest nukes of those eras. And he obviously can survive his own nukes, but that's not due to his own durability, as he is injured. But we do see him getting less injured throughout the movie, but that's not really an important part because he still does get injured at the end of the day. So we can't really scale him fully to the atomic breath, but he does have the atomic breath, which is very powerful. I mean, obviously, it's not going to work against most Godzillas, but he's fighting Shin Godzilla. He doesn't really need to be all that strong. But his greatest asset would obviously be his regeneration, because his regeneration was able to allow him as a small building level dinosaur to survive a 21 kiloton bomb dropping on his head. And obviously, a kiloton in small building feet is like millions of times difference, meaning that Godzilla -1, in order to die to an explosion, would literally have to be like millions, if not maybe even billions of times weaker than the explosion in order for his regeneration to get overtaxed. Though we do know that weaker stuff can tax his regeneration, as he did get his regeneration taxed by being crushed by sea pressure, which is kind of an anti-feat for his regeneration, but for the most part, his regen is pretty damn good. Some people try to say that it's not instantaneous because it's not instantaneous on screen, but if you're regenerating faster than a bomb that literally destroys at the subatomic level can kill you, then I would say that your regenerations act pretty damn fast. And as for like speed and stuff like that, it would fall into the subsonic ranges, as he's able to at least perceive fighter planes that move around 400 miles per hour, but he's not fully on par with their speed because he can't physically like catch them, which is pretty ass, as almost every Godzilla can at least react to supersonic degrees. But he doesn't really need to be that fast because he has a large area of effects. The only other weakness that Godzilla -1 really has is the fact that his biggest advantage, his atomic breath, takes so damn long to charge that he could very easily be killed, or at least knocked out of the charge, meaning that his greatest weapon is also his greatest weakness. With Godzilla -1 out of the way, we get to jump to Shin Godzilla. I already covered Shin Godzilla in an older video, but I did get some new ways to calculate, which I didn't know at the time, and this is mostly thanks to KOTM. I'll put his name on screen, and I'll link his channel below so that you guys can go view him. He's a great power scaler, even though a lot of people don't like his takes. He's very good at what he does. So for the most part, I haven't changed anything on my physicals for Shin. Like, Shin Godzilla does get pierced by like large building bombs, which is pretty ass. And even if people want to say it's a piercing attack, he does get affected by weaker bombs. So unfortunately, Shin Godzilla just physically would not scale that high. He wouldn't even. Yeah. Ugh. Sorry about that. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's time that we move on to his atomic breath, which I admittedly did overscale. After reviewing it again and looking through the numbers using the new calculations, his atomic breath at absolute best using the million-degree temperatures would reach up to about 1.3 gigatons of TNT, which would be about large mountain level, which is a lot higher than most people get it. I've seen most channels just put them at like small city level consistently. But this is why temperatures are necessary, because it obviously would make characters way stronger than you initially think. And he can fire about 26 of these beams at the same time, and he can also fire these about instantaneously, because the scene before that was not him actually charging the beam, but him evolving it. And his actual charge up is very quick. We see it later that he charges this thing up in like 2 seconds at worst, and like instantly at best, which means that he has 26 beams that are large mountain level on command that he can fire out of his body, which is pretty insane to think about. He himself does also have regeneration, but his regeneration is very clearly not as good as minus ones, as he's obviously injured by large building bombs, and it takes him a few moments to actually start uh, moving again and adapting to the bombs. Uh, for the most part, that's really it. Although you could also talk about his radar system. These two are really going to be just facing each other the entire time, so there's no real reason to go into most of their stuff. One thing I will leave off on a note, though, is before we go into who wins this fight, is his speed, because I think this is actually a very undermined thing. It turns out that Shin Godzilla is actually a lot faster than many people think, as he was able to react to a 1.2 Mach 1.23 bomb dropping at him, which is how fast those bunker buster bombs actually move. Shin Godzilla was able to physically perceive these to a point where he could move his stationary beams to fire. Yes, his beams are providing most of the speed to actually hit the bombs, but he has to physically move fast enough to hit them in the first place. Which means that Shin Godzilla would be at least like Mach 2 to maybe even in those ranges of Mach 3 in terms of overall reaction speed, which is a lot better than most people would ever give Shin Godzilla. And it would unironically make him like quite a bit faster than Godzilla minus one, like several times faster, along with having a much faster charge up that doesn't really bode well for minus one. Um, the only other thing that Shin Godzilla has that would even be worth talking about is his evolution, but his evolution isn't really something that's talked about in most fights because it's so slow. It took him weeks to adapt to even city block degrees that evolving to literally survive a nuclear bomb would not be something he could do, and he would just instantly die before he could ever be able to adapt to those ranges of power. So I won't go too in depth about the evolution, which does leave us with one last thing to talk about, and that's his self destruct and whether it would actually be strong enough to kill minus one. His self destruct has multiple statements of being multiple times stronger than the strongest nukes, which would mean that he'd upscale at least 1 megaton bombs. But you could interpret this to be he upscales things like the SAR Bomba, which is about 100 megatons, meaning that you could get Shin's reactor to about several hundred megatons or mountain level. But considering the fact it's charging beams that are already in the gigaton ranges, you could scale it to all the beams that Shin fires, and that would get it up into those high island ranges of power, which I think is a bit more consistent because there really isn't any point in Shin having a weaker core than all of his beams. It just doesn't really make any sense. So, but minus one's regeneration is ridiculous to a point where it's very likely that minus one could survive. Although I do think personally that minus one's regeneration would probably be a bit too overtaxed, especially if he's too close to Shin. Like if he's like only a few hundred feet away from Shin, I think that minus one's regeneration is getting overtaxed and he's going to die. But that's only if minus one could actually kill him, because Shin Godzilla has a beam that's not only very strong but also very fast. One thing that many people never talk about is the fact that minus one's regeneration is um, only been shown against bombs, which don't move anywhere near as fast as Shin's beam, which moves at the speed of light due to it being a laser and literally being composed of photons. This means that Shin Godzilla would be able to blast through minus one with a large mountain level beam at the speed of light, meaning minus one's regeneration would be so overtaxed that he physically wouldn't be able to regenerate in time because the beam would just be destroying him that fast. There's no real way for minus one to get a beam out before Shin unless Shin just stands there like an idiot because Shin's not very intelligent. Um, but I don't really see that happening because Shin Godzilla is very quick to get onto to attack anything that he deems a threat, and something that is actually much closer to his size than the humans and is walking towards him would most definitely be perceived as such. and Shin always resorts to his atomic breath first, so I don't really see any way for -1 to avoid getting shot. Although, if Shin Godzilla doesn't destroy all of -1 immediately, -1 could just nuke him, but as I said, if -1 is a bit too close to Shin when he blows up, I think that -1 could be taken out. Although you could make the argument that since -1's regeneration is just ridiculous against nukes, that -1 could maybe survive the resulting explosion, but it's a bit contentious at best. And that, for the most part, is my thoughts. I think it's either a 50-50, or Shin manages to just blast the hell out of -1. And for the most part, I think that there's nothing really stopping Shin from just obliterating -1 in like 2 seconds. He charges a beam faster, he has faster reaction time, -1's beam is just really slow, and in terms of a physical match, while -1 can beat his ass up close, he's never really gonna get close. I don't think either of these Godzillas would get close, because while Godzilla -1 is aggressive, I don't think he's stupid. Something as large as Shin Godzilla would make him pause for a moment, and that would be his downfall. But that's all I've got for this video. Sorry if the parts on the Godzilla scaling was a bit short. This is my first ever recording, and I didn't have any script planned. So, I do hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope that you subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I am hoping to do more videos like this, but I am on campus at the moment, so it's very hard to find points where it's actually quiet enough for me to record a video without random things in the background. Anyway, you guys have a great day, and keep watch of my posts to see if I'm uploading any new videos or any new polls. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe.